Pleasure to be here. Happy Nurses Week, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Isn't nursing just the best profession? I wish I could tell you that I chose nursing as a profession, but I didn't. One day in 1991, my husband came downstairs and poured himself a cup of coffee, looked me in the eye and said, "I took a job in San Francisco. I'm leaving on a 6 p.m. flight. You can come with the kids if you want." When he walked out the door, that ended 2 years of marriage counseling. Not even 2 days later, I go into the telephone answering service where I worked on the island, and there's my boss, Linda, her hair disheveled, mascara running down her face. And I said, "Linda, what's wrong?" And she said, "I'm so sorry. The treasurer embezzled all the funds. We don't even have a business anymore. We mortgaged the house. I can't even pay you for the days you worked last week, and you don't have a job anymore." I went to clean out my desk. One of our regular customers, a man named Bob, came over. He said, "What's wrong?" I tried to say nothing, and he pressed, "What's wrong?" And I told him, my worst fear just came true. I'm going to be the single mother of 5 children under the age of 11, and I'm living 3,000 miles away from my nearest relative. His reaction? He immediately reached into his back pocket, took out a checkbook, and wrote a check for $50 to a guy named Miles, shoved it into my hand, and said, "You're going to need a good attorney." And I'm thinking to myself, just like a man to be practical. I could have stayed in my state of denial for weeks, if not months, if not forever. I went and did what all women do. Called my best friend. She came over with her 3 children and made a pot of coffee. And she said, "You know, school doesn't start for 2 weeks. My parents have a cabin up in Nanaimo in Canada. Why don't we go up there?" And I thought escape sounded like a good plan. We took my 5, her 3, borrowed 2 of the neighbors to make it even, and headed north. Underneath the groceries was the margarita mix. It was supposed to be our after the children are in bed reward, but after about 5 days of absolutely pouring down rain with 10 kids in a small cabin, Kim rolled over on day 6 and looked at me and said, "Good morning," blended her on the rocks. And so I went home. I took half of them, 3 of mine, 1 of hers, 1 of the neighbors. It hardly mattered. We were a traveling tribe, and they all knew it. When I got home, I could hardly believe my eyes. 110-foot pine tree, the one that sat on our front lawn of our house, had fallen on the house. It had knocked off the entire front porch, but something bothered, and the power lines missed the main house. But the porch had caved in, and I couldn't get into the driveway. The electricity and the power lines were all taken down. I yelled to the kids to stay in the car. On the front door was something white, a foreclosure notice from the bank. We rented the house from my mother-in-law, and to this day, I never did ask why or what happened. All I knew was that in less than 2 weeks, I lost my relationship, my job, and my house. I just can still remember standing in the middle of the street looking to the left and the right for the locusts. I'm sure they were going to come any minute. Couldn't imagine what else could happen. Eventually, a few weeks later, I went down to the lawyer's office. It was a dark, very dank building in Seattle. As I knocked on the door, he bellowed, "Come in," and I took one look at the office and I realized, uh-oh. Cigar smoke hung from the ceiling, overflowing cigar ashtrays and briefs on every table and every chair and every surface. And I thought to myself, great, my lawyer's Columbo. "Sit down," he bellowed as I came in the room. There were no niceties. I sat down as he cleared off the papers for a chair, then I sat down. He reached under the desk, took a worn leather Bible out, put it on the corner of the desk and said, "I'll tell you what. How are you going to take care of those 5 kids Bob says you have?" "I don't know." "Do you like nursing?" "Nursing? I was a candy striper when I was 12. "I'll tell you what," he said. "If you put your hand on this Bible and swear to me that you'll become a nurse, I'll do your whole divorce for nothing." And I knew a deal when I saw one. Never thought about it again, never gave it a second thought, forgot that entire story until 8 years later. Forgot it. I was so fixated on getting into school, I keep my promises. But there was a 3-year waiting list in Seattle. I didn't have 3 years. I called my aunt, who was a professor of nursing in North Carolina, and she said, "You already have a 4-year degree, so why don't you just go to this 2-year program in the middle of nowhere? I'm sure you can get into it. People can't even drive to it." So I threw all the kids in the car, and we camped across America without any camping equipment. We had 1 sleeping bag and a pack of matches. And when we got to North Carolina, we bought a small trailer, 500 square feet. That's where we lived for the 3 years while I went to nursing school. Drove almost 100 miles a day. because I went straight from school to work, where I worked 30 hours a week at the University of Greensboro and then another 20 miles home. Almost fell apart a couple weeks before graduation. Almost didn't make it. Sobbed through the entire graduation ceremony. Tears, just tears of relief that the hardest thing I'd ever done was finally over. Used up the tissues of everybody on the stage. I went to work in a small community hospital in North Carolina where I'd done my student preceptorship. Some of the nurses were wonderful. An older nurse named Ruth, who was a tobacco farmer's wife, took me under her wing and taught me everything. I could ask that woman a question every single day, and I did for 3 years. No question was ever stupid. And then there were other nurses who had a mild case of PMS or personality disorder. All I knew is what they said with their mouth never matched what they said with their eyes. In fact, I still can remember getting dressed up for the interview and walking to work in my best suit that I had. And Jonna, the charge nurse, looked at me and went, "You look nice." I didn't even know how to respond to this. Maybe it's a Southern thing, I thought. I don't know. I just ignored them. A couple years later, there was an opportunity for me to go back to the Pacific Northwest, and I missed the land and the water. I flew out there and received a per diem position in a, quote, real hospital. 350 beds. Maalox became my new breakfast drink. You never knew where you were going to end up as a float. But I found out within 2 days that I should get there earlier and earlier and earlier. And if I got there between 6:30 and 20 minutes to 7, that I had my choice of what units to go to. This was really important because there were some units I never wanted to go back to again. And it wasn't because of the patients. It was because the nurses would dump on me. They'd give me every patient who had just been given a bottle of Go Lightly, was in 4-point leather restraints or both. Then there were other units that were really nice. One in particular was fantastic. It was neuro. The nurses were just the most professional, kind, accountable people I had ever met in my life. Every decision of every day depended on only one thing: what is best for the patient? I worked there for 3 years. Had no health benefits, worked 40 hours a week as a per diem nurse. After a couple of years, things began to happen that really revealed who people were. Here's an example. I was working and it was a Thursday, and Judy came in and she picked up the assignment sheet. She looked through the papers and said, "Well, Kathleen, it looks like it's your turn to float today, and you've been here all week with these patients. Look, you stay with the patients, you know. I'll float for you." Happened all the time. Even in the middle of a shift, if I developed a special relationship or a bond while I was covering for another nurse while they went to lunch, I would ask them when they returned from lunch, "Can I have 32? And the only response I ever got was, "Sure, which one of yours would you like me to take?" No one even asked me why. Because the level of trust was so high, they knew I would never interrupt another nurse's assignment unless I had a darn good reason, and they trusted that reason. I could have stayed there forever. But my food budget and my food bill was growing much faster than my paycheck was. These kids were getting into their teenage years. I looked around the hospital. There was a position posted, supervisor of orthopedics. Oh, I'd floated to that floor. Those nurses had strong personalities. I waited till one of the head ringleaders came over and floated to our floor. She had no formal power, but a lot of informal power. I said, "Would you mind if I applied for that position as supervisor?" She looked at me and said, "Honey, it's been posted for 1.5 years. If one of us wanted it, we would have taken it by now. Go right ahead." And to this day, she said, "You had my permission to take the job." And then she said, "So you need my permission to leave it." So I took the position, but suddenly, within about 3 months, there was a massive reorganization. You see, one manager was managing 550 employees. There was supposed to be a supervisor who applied for each area, but for 2 of the areas, no supervisors ever applied. Suddenly, I'm first in line for manager of orthopedics in a brand new spine unit with only 5 years of nursing experience under my belt. Once again, there's no competition. Nobody else has even applied for the job. I couldn't resist. The increase in salary was so great, there's no way that I couldn't take it. But I was terrified because I knew I didn't know how to manage or lead. I was a mother with 5 kids and a new nurse still in my own eyes. I took the job, but I called my aunt and said, what am I supposed to do? My director called me into her office, looked me in the eye and said, these people work under your license. Everything they do, if they make a mistake, it's your responsibility, and don't ever forget that. How am I supposed to monitor all the things that happen 24 hours a day? I'm not even there. And she looked at me and she said, you know what? You take care of the staff. They'll take care of the patients. All you need to do is care for the staff. I thought that was a little simplistic when I first heard it. Didn't trust those words. But something happened about 3 or 4 months later that really framed everything. Reframed, I should say. Every single morning I come on to 9th and the 10th floor, I round. I don't go to my office. I round through both units. I'm rounding on the 9th floor and there's a crash cart next to 64. Patient found with an O2 sat of 52% that morning by the day shift nurse. They've already been taken to the ICU. Anoxic changes in the brain that are so severe, the patient can't talk in a sentence, even on a full rebreather mask. So the doctor ordered an MRI. He's not sure she'll return to baseline. I grabbed the PCA, I brought it down to my office, I opened it up to find a manager's worst nightmare. It's programmed for morphine and there's a syringe of Dilaudid in there. The patient received 30 milligrams of Dilaudid. Just then the new nurse comes in. She takes one look at the syringe in my hand, mumbles something under her breath and bursts into tears. It's about 45 minutes of counseling, of reviewing everything that happened. I found out that she opened the door every single hour to that patient's room. And you know what happened every time she did? The husband said, go away. My wife's tired. She's been worried about the surgery for months. She hasn't gotten any sleep. We'll call you if we need you. And that's what she did. Finally, I got to ask the question I wanted. What did you mean when you came into my office and you mumbled something under your breath? Sounded like I shouldn't have let them get to me? Her eyes immediately went down to the floor. I was about 7 minutes late for the shift last night. When I came around the main nursing station, there were a group of nurses talking. As soon as I became visible, all the conversation stopped. I went into the ladies' room. You can hear from there, you know. Edna said, she'll never make a good nurse, will she? And somebody else whose voice I didn't recognize said, she just doesn't have what it takes, does she? I let those words destroy me. This is all my fault, she said. This is my fault. I said, no, it's not your fault. Those nurses should have never said that. You're a good nurse. There's not a book in the world that can capture the expertise of any nurse who's been in the field for 20 years. You're not supposed to know that in school. You learn that while you're on the floor, through experience. You can't know the whole alphabet from A to Z as soon as you hit the floor. You've been here for a year. You're doing a good job. You know A, that's enough. It didn't matter what I said. She transferred off my unit to the very first position available anywhere in the hospital. And thank goodness, it was neuro. That's when I realized my patients will never be safe until the nurses are safe. I started listening. I heard things the nurses said to each other, especially at change of shift. I hate to follow her. She left the IV bag dry again. Did you hear who made another medication error? Where'd they hire her from? She's never going to make it. She comes over for the bone marrow unit. God, she's been in an orientation for 2 weeks and she still doesn't know what she's doing, etc., etc. I drew a line in the sand. I had crucial conversation workshops, taught people how to talk to each other, explained to them that we had to take care of our emotions and our environment. Just like Florence Nightingale took care of the environment, we had to take care of the psychological and social environment. That until the nurses were safe, it's not possible for the patients to be, because human beings can't think straight when they're upset. In the Harvard Business Review last year, there was a study, had nothing to do with healthcare. It was a study about rude behavior in the workplace, and do you know what it found? Quote, simply witnessing rude behavior in the workplace significantly impairs your ability to perform cognitive tasks. Significantly impairs. You know, I don't know about you, but I remember in great detail my last mistake. And I come from Seattle, where a nurse took her own life on April 4th of last year after drawing up the wrong amount of calcium carbonate. And a baby died. So we have to keep the environment good. I worked hard and received an award, top 10% in patient, employee, and physician satisfaction at a big managers meeting. That's when the other managers really pushed me away, isolated. No one ever saved me a chair next to a meeting. You know when you walk into a room and somebody says, here, sit here? I never heard that. Nobody ever shared a meal with me or a coffee or talked to me if they didn't absolutely have to. And I couldn't understand why. But I had 5 kids at home and a tough job, so I just ignored them. And 2 more years went by. Now I'd been a manager for 5 years and my health was suffering. I was coming in every Saturday, working 70 hours a week. I was the educator, the scheduler, I was everything. I went to my boss like I had done 20 times before and said, look, I really need some more help. And she said, sorry, again. But this time, my response was different. I said, okay, then here's my resignation. I'm giving you notice. And she said, oh, no, no, don't go there. I mean, we'll find a 0.5 position somewhere. I was thrilled because I actually loved my job, really liked my job. I was going back up to my office and the elevator doors opened. A manager walked in and said, how are you? And I said, fine, actually I'm great. Pat gave me a 0.5 position and it looks like I'm going to be able to stay. I thought I was going to have to quit this morning. And immediately she turned around and stormed out of the elevator. And I'm thinking, weird. 20 minutes later, the phone rings in my office and it's the VP of nursing. Come down to my office immediately. What? Why? I want to know why you're running around the hospital telling everybody you have a 0.5 position and they don't. What? I go down to her office and she tells me that I'm not to tell anybody. And I said, but it's logical. I'm the only manager who has 2 floors. It doesn't matter. Don't tell anyone. And so I go back up to my office. The elevator doors open on the 9th floor and there's another manager, yet another one standing there. Emails don't travel this fast in our organization. She's got her finger out. She's looking at me and she says, listen here, Missy. Now that you got that 0.5 position you've been yapping about, you better just keep your big mouth shut. I thought to myself, where am I? I can still remember going into my office, shutting the door and leaning up against it, thinking, this place is strange. Just then the phone rings. It's Timothy's counselor at school. He wants to discuss his 0.6 GPA, so as you know, I was distracted. I went on to other things. Who knows that a GPA could go that low? 2 weeks later, I get a phone call. And the phone call is from the people who published my master's thesis on physician-nurse relationships, and they said, will you write a book on nurse-to-nurse hostility? And I said, what is it? What's that? And they told me, and I said, what do you want me to write a book on this for? We've done focus groups across the country. Nurses want to know the answer to the question, why do nurses eat their young and these days each other? And I said, I don't think so. Sounds negative. Well, you're giving me a 3-month deadline. I'd have to quit my job to write it? Definitely no. And they said, promise us you'll just think about it. Okay, fine. Went to my master's program. I was required to get a master's degree in order to keep my position. Thought that was going to send me off the edge of the cliff. Turned to one of my students and shared with them I'd been asked to write the book, and she said, guess what? The lead researcher in the entire world, Dr. Jerry Farrell, is coming to Oregon. The psychiatric nurses are having a conference, and they've invited him. He's been studying bullying behaviors for 20 years. Why don't you go down to that conference and maybe you can, help make your mind up. Sounded like a good idea. It's only a 2-hour drive. I was curious. Drove down to Oregon. As soon as I entered the conference, there was a series of 4 or 5 poster presentations. The first one said, what is nurse-to-nurse hostility? In fact, it's the flyer that I gave you. I looked and I start reading the poster, but then I catch a look on the lady's face standing next to her poster. Tell me your story, I said. Immediately her eyes went down to the floor. Same thing the last nurse did. That's an expression, as it turns out, of shame in human beings. 20 years ago, when I was a new nurse, I so wanted to be a good nurse. Never wanted to be anything else. Came from a family of nurses. I mean, that's all I ever wanted. My mother was a nurse, my aunt was a nurse. Couldn't wait for that first week when I was on the floor actually graduating, practicing, taking patients. Things were busy on the unit. The charge nurse, called me over. There were a lot of discharges. She sent me on an errand. Mara, come quick, she said. Run down to the operating room, tell them we need a fallopian tube, stat. And so I did. I was the brunt of that hospital's jokes for months. Even 3 months later, when I came back from the cafeteria, people would put their hand up over their face to hide the smirk. You think I can't see your hand? I listened to a day and a half of research. Can't tell you any of it. I never forgot that nurse's story. At the end of the conference, by the time it ended, I thought, maybe there's something more to this. I put up a piece of paper just like this. And I said to the conference coordinators, do you mind if I ask if any other nurses have a story? And about 30 nurses signed their names and their phone numbers, and I called each and every one of them. And by the time I listened to the third story, I quit my job. How is it possible in a profession that's based on caring that nurses could ever experience uncaring behaviors with their peers? It didn't make sense. One nurse said, I work on a pretty good unit. We only have one toxic nurse. Let me tell you, that nurse is like gangrene, and the manager won't cut her off so we can all live. Another nurse said, the hostility on our unit is thinly veiled. What does that mean, thinly veiled? I'll just tell you about yesterday, she said. I walked into the cardiac cath lab and I said I'm pretty new there, I said to the charge nurse, nice day, isn't it? And she looked at me and said, what's that supposed to mean? She didn't speak to me at all, not at all, until it was time to go to meal break. She comes to me and says, I'm going on my meal break. I said, tell me about your patients. And she said, they're fine, you don't need to know. I said, I beg to differ with you. We work in a cardiac cath lab. At the very least, I need to know who has a sheath and who does not. And begrudgingly, she told me. When she came back from her meal break, I reported to her that all of her patients were fine, but that 42's IV was loose and I had resecured it. She looked at me and said, that could have waited till I got back. It's a niggling, undermining tone that never seems to end. So I listened to story after story. Out of the first 35 stories that I collected, 2 ended in suicide attempts. One was from an organizer of the conference. She worked on a med-surg unit. She said, I'd been there for about 11 months. This was about 10 years ago. I just couldn't seem to do anything right. One night I came up to the charge nurse and said, I've never done this procedure before, can you help me? And she looked at me and said, can't you see I'm busy? Look it up in the procedure manual. I looked it up in the procedure manual and the page was gone. I went to the only other nurse on the floor and said, I've not done this before, could you help me? And she said, what, have you been here almost a year now? Use your head and figure it out. Nobody's got time to be helping you after a year. So I did. The next day when I came into work, there was a note on my time card. It said, see the manager before your shift. I walked into the manager's office to find out that those 2 had written me up for doing the procedure incorrectly. It was the last straw. It was like the 15th time something just like that had happened. It was too much. I went out to my car, there was a bottle of Percocet from somebody's dental appointment or something. I took the whole bottle just to stop the pain. Just came from Canada where a nurse was bullied off the unit. It was a very remote area. It's not like she had a choice of going to another hospital. No matter what she did, the nurses wouldn't let her belong. So she went home and took her own life. And I struggled still to make sense. How is it possible? The first thing I found out was that nobody sees it. I didn't even see it. Nobody sees it because it's a part of our culture. What is culture? Anthropologists say that talking about your own culture is like a fish talking about water. It's the last thing you see because it's all around you. My definition of culture is 3 things. Everybody knows it, nobody talks about it, and it's not written down anywhere. For example, I come from Seattle, and when I moved there, there were 2 roads, and whenever 2 roads merged into one road, the cars were always backed up on this road for a mile and a half even. So I thought to myself, well, I'm just going to go up to the merge point. And it's as if these people have sent a text message to each other, and they said, whatever you do, don't let that woman in. And you wait there for so long that the next time you go that way, you get in line behind the rest of them. Culture. Everybody knows it, nobody talks about it, and it's not written down anywhere. It's more powerful than anything in any institution, especially knowledge. Dr. Kathleen Simpson did a study. She took L&D nurses who were trained and certified. They were certified in their specialty. She taught them best practice for Pitocin delivery. She tested them to make sure they knew the information, and then she threw a trick question in at the end. Doctor walks in to the room. He asked you to turn the Pitocin up to the wrong amount. Will you do it? 78% of the nurses said yes. Half of those said, oh, but I'd watch the patient more carefully after I did it. What? I'm working with a group of ICU nurses, trying to explain culture when suddenly I get an idea. See this white piece of paper? Imagine this white piece of paper is the nursing profession. If that's the nursing profession and I draw a line on the bottom, what's that line represent? One of the nurses said, rehab. Oh, really? What's this? Hospice, medical, surgical, tele, L&D, ER, OR. What's at the top? Now they're deathly quiet. Nobody will answer me. You are, and you know it. I don't care if you're the best ICU nurse in the whole world. You're of absolutely no use to me. If I'm looking at a 3-year recovery from a multi-injury accident, if I've had a massive stroke and I've got to learn to focus on where my tongue is so I can swallow and talk again, I got to think about my left foot going above my right in one step is a huge accomplishment. I want the best rehab nurse in the world. And when I'm on med-surg, I want the best med-surg nurse, the one who has the most broad scope of knowledge base. Where did that come from? Where did it come from? And how come you could all answer me at the exact same time? Here's another example of culture. You go to a meeting. Your boss breaks out something new. New policy, new procedure, new thing that you're doing on your unit, and you don't agree. So you say so. You say, I don't think that's going to work. Everybody looks at you like you're not a team player. How do you know that? Right. You're not a team player. So that's what I found out. I found out that the reason that this is such a problem is because it's insidious, because nobody sees it. And you can't fight something that you can't see. Researchers did a study. They wanted to find out how worried are people who live downstream from a dam that the dam is going to break and destroy their homes. And what they found out was right here at the 2-mile mark is people were most worried that the dam would break. And just as you'd expect, the further and further you got down the river, the less and less worried people were about the dam breaking. However, researchers were shocked because when they studied from the 2-mile mark to the dam, the closer and closer you got to the dam, the less and less worried people were about the dam breaking. In fact, when they asked people whose homes were directly under the dam, are you worried about the dam breaking? An expression passed over their face. Dam? What dam? Oh, that dam. And what they found out was something about human beings. When you live in physical danger, you can't allow yourself to perceive the danger that you're in or you couldn't function, so you put it out of your realm of awareness. Same thing is true with social, psychological, and emotional danger. As a staff nurse, I lived right there. Some nurses I liked to work with and some I didn't. As a manager, I lived right here. I saw the Sentinel event that happened on my unit. I knew that a nurse who was upset couldn't think clearly and that would make a mistake and it would put my patients in danger. But when I went to the library and pulled every article that existed, the operating room nurses call it interactive workplace trauma. Lateral violence there is, horizontal hostility, incivility, bullying, verbal abuse. I pulled all 200 articles and read them. It was there that I came down to that 2-mile mark, where I'm most concerned that of all the challenges this profession faces, this one is the greatest. Jonathan Burroughs says, culture's not what we say, not what we think, not what we mean, or even what we intend. It's what we do. Let me give you a very profound example. A physician and nurse have known each other for over 20 years. They're both considered very good nurses, a good doctor. The doctor comes in on Monday morning and says, "Good morning, Karen." He goes straight to the computer and he starts typing. And Karen says, "Good morning, Sean." He's still typing and he hasn't even looked up when Karen says, "You know, Sean, you owe me." That's when he says, "Why is that?" And she says, "I wrote orders for you all weekend long." That's when Sean stands up, walks over to Karen, gives her a little punch on the shoulder and says these words, "You're the best, Karen." What? What just happened there? You just put your nursing license online? For a few kudos from a person you have a good relationship with? What's going on here? And we all know how that started. 10 years of her calling and saying, the patient's allergic to morphine, they're itching. 10 years of him saying, then switch them to Dilaudid. One night he says to her at 2 o'clock in the morning, why didn't you just switch? Why didn't you just switch to Dilaudid? You know that's what I do. And the first time she did it, he leaned over and said, thank you. Thanks for not waking me up last night. Culture. There isn't anything stronger in any institution. Why? Because people do what other people do to belong. They know what to do to belong. I started where all researchers start. What is the definition of horizontal hostility? Farrell says it's a consistent pattern of behavior designed to control, diminish, or devalue a person or a group. It puts them at risk to health or safety. The only thing I disagree with is I'd put hidden in there, because you don't see it. It shares 3 elements common to racial and sexual harassment law. It's defined in terms of its effect. It doesn't matter if the people knew they were doing it or not. Here's an example. I just came from an L&D unit where a nurse says, we had a particularly rough shift, and somebody said in the morning, let's all go out for breakfast. And I looked at the group and said, where are you going? There was an awkward moment of silence before someone responded, we don't know yet. I went into my locker to get my stuff. I wasn't planning on going after that. Another kinder nurse came up and said, I just want to let you know we're going to the Pancake House. We'll be at Perkins. And before the door shut, I could hear someone say to her, what'd you have to go and tell her for? It doesn't matter if those nurses knew what they were doing or not. It has to be negative and consistent. Basically, I'm talking about these. The heck with the definition. I'm talking about these behaviors. Eye-rolling, ignoring, making faces, refusing to help somebody, gossiping, raised eyebrows. And the number 1 most popular one in the entire nursing profession is raised eyebrows and rolling of the eyes. Probably started by the OR nurses. No. You know, I mean, I understand that's the only part that you could speak with, but you do a great job. In fact, if there was a reality TV show for nonverbal behaviors, nursing would win hands down and OR would cream everyone. What I can't say with my eyes, right? And these both groups, of course, the ones that are the most damaging are the covert. Why? Because research shows that the covert are more ambiguous, and ambiguity increases stress and decreases self-esteem. Was it really an unfair assignment? Or did somebody not work the day before and didn't realize that they were giving you the hardest patients on the floor? Or as one OR nurse told me, I complained about a physician when he treated me very badly. He was very rude to me. And so I complained to my manager, and you know what they did? They took me out of the room for 1 week. And then to teach me a lesson, they put me back in that room for 6 months. I'm never going to say another word. So what I have discovered is that all of these behaviors that you see up here, I'm going to take all the behaviors in my hand and I'm going to put them right here. These are the gray zone. You know why they're the gray zone? Because nothing ever happens. People get away with doing it. They're not right or wrong. They're not black or white. They're gray. Researchers did a study. They wanted to find out, why do kids from Boys Town, USA make $20,000 more a year? These kids are juvenile delinquents, juvies we call them, and serious crimes. Why would they make more money than kids who graduate from other schools? So the researchers went to Boys Town, and this is what they saw. A man was cutting the grass. 2 boys were just roughing on the lawn. One of the boys suddenly cursed at the other boy. The man cutting the grass turned off the lawnmower, walked over to the boy who cursed and said, you have 2 choices. Do you want to walk to the headmasters alone, or shall I accompany you? Because at Boys Town, there is no gray. Everything is black or white. And because of that, their self-esteem is high. It's like land, water, or skating on thin ice. There is no thin ice at Boys Town. It doesn't matter if his friend says to him, oh, come on, it's okay. We were just playing. He didn't mean it. It just slipped out. Doesn't matter. Not so in healthcare. These behaviors are prevalent. Prevalent. There's plenty of them. They happen all of the time. I was in a department store in Ohio. It was 8 o'clock at night, 8:30 actually, and I had just stopped by to get an umbrella, and I opened the door. All I heard was a 6-year-old wailing Not crying, wailing. Her voice was going up and down like this. Oh. And I thought to myself, I could transport this kid to the Wailing Wall of Jerusalem and she'd fit in just fine. 9 o'clock, they announced the store's closed. There's nobody else in it but the three of us. I find myself at the checkout counter and I'm standing next to the wailing mother, the mother and the wailing child. I turn to the mother. Too much TV? The mother looks at me and says, oh, no, first grade, watch this. Bends down, looks into her daughter's eyes and says, Peggy, use words, Peggy. And that's when Peggy's song has lyrics, as she says, they hate me. No one will play with me. No one likes me. Over and over again. This child's wound was so raw, so visible. You felt like you could just reach out and put your hand in her pain. This I know is true. It doesn't matter if you're 6, 36, or 56, a man or a woman. To be pushed away from any group feels the exact same way. That's why, about 4 or 5 kids already this year in the United States have committed suicide due to bullying behaviors of being pushed away from the group. There is nothing worse. There is nothing worse. We know that it happens in the world, not just in the United States. There's tons of studies. Dr. Farrell found that bullied staff had lower job satisfaction, higher stress, higher depression and anxiety, and higher intent to leave. A third said they were specifically going to leave because of verbal abuse. There's tons of studies in the United States as well. We don't need to prove that it exists. Does it happen more in healthcare than any other professions? Yes. About 10% are the studies in other professions, 30% in healthcare. Why? People suspect it's more stressful. Does it happen in certain areas in healthcare more than others? Yes. The operating room, the emergency room, the ICU, high stress areas. After that, it would probably be psych and L&D. What does verbal abuse from physicians have to do with nurse-to-nurse relationships? It's called submissive-aggressive syndrome. When they study primates, anthropologists find out that the primate who loses a fight and turns around and walks away will always swat another primate that was minding his own business. So when the physician takes away our power, how do people take away our power or make us feel small, belittle us, make us feel insignificant? By not knowing my name. If I worked there 6 months or 6 years. By when I ask them a question, they turn to me and they look at me with that face that says, yes, as if my very act of speaking is an interruption that they wish it would hurry up and get over with. Come to the floor and look at the chart and see the patient, have no need to talk to me. The nurse has been with that patient for the last 12 hours. Check and see if there's any complications or anything. It's almost like I'm invisible. And we have a tendency to go and overpower somebody else. Why? Because we're humans, because we're primates. Dr. Farrell found out that of all the types of aggression nurses experience, peer-to-peer hostility is the worst. Why? To use the military metaphor, we're in the trench, and I'm fighting to get the baby delivered, the burn patient stable, the blood pressure up or down, the pain controlled, and all of a sudden somebody attacks me from the ditch. And the feeling is one of betrayal. I thought we were on the same page. He found out that the impact was profound in 4 areas: psychological, physical, emotional, and social. Nurses who report the highest degree of conflict also have the highest degree of burnout. So if you've got conflict, then you're going to burn out faster. Decreased job satisfaction, morale, increased intent to leave. 3 out of 4 people who had been bullied in the last study show classic symptoms and met the criteria for PTSD. Of all these 4, the greatest one is physical. Why? Because your body's not designed to be vigilant or to experience small stressors constantly 24/7 every single solitary day. Think of your work environment right now. Is there somebody who you think might not like you or doesn't like you? They don't. Why? Because 93% of communication is nonverbal. And if you think that, you're probably picking up on it. And likewise, if there's somebody you don't like working with, don't think they're good, they know that. Doesn't matter if you've never said a word, because we are much more transparent. 93% of all communication is nonverbal. All I have to do is look at you and roll my eyes, and that's enough. In fact, her Dr. Gottesman is the lead marriage family therapist in the entire country. And he does video clips of a husband and wife when they're just married, and then he follows up on them years later. He can now tell with phenomenal accuracy which ones are going to be divorced and which ones aren't. Do you know which ones are going to be divorced? He used to have to watch the entire tape. Now he only has to watch it for a minute or two. Because as soon as one partner rolls their eyes at the other, he knows that relationship will never last. Rolling your eyes, he says, is a sign of contempt. It's personal. It's directed at you. Thomas says, you know, all too often we leave the workplace bone-tired and soul-weary, trying to shake off the sticky residue of moral distress, the realization that we couldn't give the care that we deserve, the time that we wanted. We do the clinical things we're supposed to, but it's the time that we want to spend engaged with the patient that we can't do. There are two theories that could help us understand better human beings under stress, and at work, and as a group. The one of them is human adaptability theory. It says that changes that are small and incremental are never noticed by human beings. If you take a frog and throw him in hot water, he jumps out right away. If you take a frog and put him in cold water and you turn up the temperature very, very slowly over a long period of time, at no point will the frog ever jump out of the water. 2 years ago, I have to float to the oncology unit. My very first patient has 35 scheduled meds. Out of the 35, I'm a float nurse. I can tell you I honestly know 18 very well. I have to look up the other 17. But what I'm really struggling for is, why is this patient on all these meds? I have other patients. I try desperately to look them up during my shift, but I don't. I can't. I skip my lunch. I skip my break. There's simply not enough time. And at the end of the shift, my only recourse is to write myself up for not knowing what those drugs are and why the patient was giving them and the side effects of all of them. And I've got a funny feeling that if you put the 3 physicians that were writing these orders for these medications in a court of law, they couldn't answer that question either. My hip patients used to stay for 2 weeks 20 years ago. Now they stay for what? A day and a half. Everybody was going yahoo last week when we got one out in 1 day. Right. Well, when they're there for 2 weeks, I can tell you how many kids they have. I can have a relationship with them. I can tell you what sports team they like, what they're worried about. You know, when they're there for a day and a half, I can't even tell you their name. I try. I'll say to the nursing assistant, Mrs. Richardson needs a wheelchair. And they always look at me and go, who? And I say, Mrs. Richardson. And they go, who? And the answer to who in nursing is always a number. 42, bay 3, 64. Changes that are slow and incremental are not noticed by human beings. An older nurse is not a safer nurse. You reach for the heparin 3,000 times in your career. Why would you think the 3,001st time that the pharmacy tech, why would you even suspect after you've done this 3,000 times, you could do it practically blindfolded, that the pharmacy tech put in the wrong dose, that that was an adult dose vial, and after you gave it, 6 babies died? You wouldn't. How many times have we driven home from work and not known how we got there? It's called chunking. At the beginning and the end, we're aware, but our basal ganglia stops in the middle. I know surgeons who can do 6 back-to-back knee surgeries. I think they chunk them all. I called down one day. I pride myself on being a nurse who has all the answer to the questions. I had a patient who came from surgery, and their blood pressure was dropping. It was now like 70/40. I got all the information before I called. I was prepared for any question I thought that physician could ask. Is there blood in the blood bank? Yes, 1 unit. What was the pre-op blood pressure? Got it. How much blood did the patient lose during surgery? How many fluids did they receive? I had every question. And yet I still couldn't answer his very first question when I called him in the operating room. He says to me, is that my 4th surgery or my 5th? I said, it's Mrs. Johansson. Her blood pressure is 70/40. And he said, I said, is that my 4th or 5th surgery? I said, I wouldn't know. I don't have your surgery schedule. I know it's Mrs. Johansson. I can tell you everything about her. Well, then I can't talk to you, he said. Right. This is my favorite article. In 1965, it appeared in Reader's Digest, and right here it says, in the year 2000, Americans will have 660 billion more hours of leisure time. And the whole article goes on to say, what are we going to do with all the free time we have in the year 2000? We're going to have to build schools of recreation to teach people how to have fun. We're going to have 10 times as many golf courses. What the heck happened? What happened? In 1965, one man worked 40 hours a week to maintain a standard of living for 4 people. That now it takes 2 people working 50 to 60 hours a week to maintain, well, I can't say the same standard of living because it's not. We have a different standard of living now, and we don't even realize we've been led to it. Every kid doesn't have to have their own room. Every person doesn't have to have a car, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on, and we don't even understand that people study us like they study rats. There's a reason why all the fruit and vegetables is on the right side of a store. It's because they've run videotapes, and people who walk into the store, 99% of them always turn right first. Well, why would you put the fruit and vegetables on the front of the store? Because that doesn't even make any sense. That's the fragile stuff in your cart. You want to pick that stuff up last so that it's on the top and not crushed. But research shows that if you put the fruits and vegetables at the front of the store, the customers are more likely to buy junk food. They're more likely to go for the Doritos and the chips. Why? Because they already have the fresh fruit. And they feel like, oh, okay, well, now I've got that stuff. So they study us and convince us to buy things that we don't need, never did need, and now can't live without. And then we work harder than ever. A second theory is really important. It's called oppression theory. A man wanted to know what happens in groups of human beings when some have more power than others. Because this here is about power. In fact, in all food chains, in the hospital food chain, who's at the lowest part of the food chain? Usually it's maintenance or housekeeping. Then you go up to dietary, material management, nursing assistants, nurses. What makes a doctor feel like he's superior to a nurse? I don't care if you're the best surgeon in the entire world. You're of no use to me if I put that patient, into a MRSA-infected room. I don't care if you're the best nurse in the world. If material management runs out of the doctor writes for a DVT protocol and you run out of the SCDs, and the patient develops a clot and dies, as one of our patients did within 13 minutes of arriving on the floor. We need each other, but where did that come from? So I'm interested in power. What happens when some groups of people have more power than the other? Paulo Freire studied all of the colonies that the Europeans had colonized in the southern hemisphere. And what he found out was that the dominant group, even though there were fewer of them, exerted so much power downward that the oppressed group couldn't direct its power upward. So they started attacking each other. But it wasn't conscious. It was unconscious. And the second thing is that they forgot what they valued, and they started valuing what the dominant group valued instead. They started judging themselves on the values of the dominant group. Let me give you an example. The dominant group were all white people. The oppressed groups were black. The black people loved their dark skin. In fact, the deeper the shade, the more beautiful they were. Suddenly these white people come in and take over, and after a few years, who's the most beautiful now? Those with the fairest skin. Let's change it to healthcare. Who has the power in healthcare? Who says what you can have, what you can't have? Physicians are one group, administration, the whole healthcare system, really. And what do these people value? Money. Yeah, there's no money. Why do they? Now, they don't say that. They say they value quality and safety, but we know that the bottom line is money because 95% of every discussion is about money. 95%, so clearly that's what your top value is. But here's the problem. It doesn't sound right for any hospital to say this is my top priority, but it is. It has to be. Healthcare's a business. And I need money to keep the lights on, to keep the buildings funded, to pay the salaries. And that's why in America, not in other countries, money is the number one. It has to be. And what do you value? I'll tell you what I value. I value my relationship with the patient. I didn't choose nursing. I can remember the exact moment when I discovered a year into the career exactly what it was. I'm simply washing an old man's back, giving him a bath, and suddenly he burst into sobs. I jumped back. "Did I hurt you?" I said. "No, no," he said gruffly, "go on." I give him a box of tissues. He's still sniffling, calming down. I return to washing his back. After a minute of silence, he says, "I'm sorry. You see, my wife died 22 years ago, and no one's touched my back since that day." And at that moment, I knew what every nurse would say. "I'm sorry. What was her name?" "Marta. Tell me all about Marta." And he tells me what she planted in the garden, why she loved the rain. It's nowhere in my charting, and it's the longest bath I've ever given. Likewise, in the American Journal of Nursing, there was a story about a PICU nurse who saw that the parents were incredibly distraught, more distraught than any parents she had ever seen before. Their baby was dying of a birth defect. She went over to talk to them, and she found out that really their Indian religion said that the baby's soul would be trapped in the building for all eternity, and that's the part they were having the most trouble with. She immediately called the janitor who opened the stairwell, put out some chairs, and sat with the family, and the baby died with its soul released to the heavens. What's the billing code for a free soul? What's the billing code for an old man's grief? What's the billing code for an OR nurse who can take a patient who is so vulnerable and so terrified, and with their words give them confidence and reassure them, tell them not to be afraid and guarantee that they'll be taken care of, etc., etc. A million things you all do every day. So when what you do is not valued by the dominant group, then we act out unconsciously. The second thing is that all oppressed groups act like a school of fish. Why do fish travel in a school? To stay safe. And they want everybody the same. This is the theory that explains why that nurse shook her finger at me. Do you know why she shook her finger at me? Because I was drawing attention to the group and putting the whole group in danger. I didn't realize that. I was radically different than any other manager. Why? Just because nobody, really, the institution was so busy that nobody paid attention to what I was doing. My director never came up to see me on the floor. She didn't even find out for 3.5 years that I took the charge nurse office, gutted it, painted a mural on the wall, and had a hammock and a Tempur-Pedic mattress with a waterfall in it to make a relaxation room for my 12-hour nurses. It took them over 3 years to find that out. So I could do whatever I wanted. I just did the right thing. But you know what? I was an outlier. If my scores were high and theirs weren't, then I was making them look bad, and they didn't like that. It's not really just about healthcare, it's about a society. We live in a society that values these things over the others. For example, we value objective and science over subjective art and caring. How do we know that? Well, look at this. How come the person who has the least amount of technology and the most amount of time with the patient would be at the bottom? And the person you value the most is a ventilated patient who can't respond on 8 machines. Why? Because it's an extrapolation of what our society values. When what you do is disconnect it from what you value, Quine says you begin to feel fear, helplessness, and a lack of energy. When hostility exists on one level, horizontally, it also exists vertically. It exists all over the place. These numbers do not add up to 100% because once it's okay for one group to start doing it, then the other group starts to do it. And managers can overpower staff in very subtle ways. It's 7 o'clock in the morning, your shift ends at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At 8 o'clock in the morning, your manager walks by and says, "Oh, Jackie, can I talk to you after work today? Could you stop by my office after the shift?" And by noon, you're heading for Tums. What does she want to talk to me about? That's a power play. It's a power play. And she learned that from somebody else who did the same thing to her. We know that new grads experience 45 to 60% humiliation and rudeness. Why? Because everybody's so busy. That's a little bit of the picture, but it's not the whole picture. If you zoomed out, we could learn so much more about nursing. What are those things? The first thing is that we can't look at our profession exempt from the entire world. We live in a world that's sick. The headlines of the papers yesterday, 42% of our entire population, it's 30%, now it's going to go up to 42%, is going to be obese in 2030. The cost of that is going to be $550 billion. Every nurse I know has been asked to do more with less. You don't think that $550 billion that's going to cost is going to trickle down to you again, like it always does? Over 11% of those people are over 100 pounds overweight. Medical anthropologists say that our children are sicker than us. It'll take 2 generations. If you're 50 years old, and let's say you have a 10-year-old grandchild, it'll take 2 generations for your grandchild to be as healthy as you were when you were a kid because of all the environmental poisons and because of all the stuff in our food. Emotions are running strong in the profession. Why we do emotional work? It's not easy when somebody doesn't make it. It's not easy when someone wakes up and you've had to amputate their leg to help them cope. It's not easy to stand by a new mother who's holding her stillborn baby. It's not easy when somebody doesn't make it in the emergency room, the operating room, etc. You stand right next to people in their most terrified moments of life, and you are willing to be there. And that is the greatest gift of them all. But you don't live in a society that values that, or a profession that values that. And so we have a tendency to not value it ourselves. One nurse said, I was in an emergency room. I'm an emergency room nurse. And one day I was sweeping my kitchen, and the handle of the broom hit a plate that was on the wall. As soon as the plate fell to the ground and crashed, I fell to the floor and I sobbed. I couldn't stop sobbing. My husband came in and said, what are you doing, Ethel? You know, that we both know that plate cost 50 cents, and I bought it at a flea market. It took me 15, 20 minutes to calm down before I figured out what was going on. You see, I only have one child. He's a 14-year-old boy. 3-4 days ago, we lost a 13-year-old in our emergency room. I just didn't have a chance. When feelings are bottled up, we resonate with other human beings. It's not a weakness. It's our greatest strength. There's intrinsic factors that increase, and extrinsic factors as well. Intrinsic, the fact that, I'm not going to go through all of these, but the strongest one is probably the third one, intermittent reinforcement. Somebody who exhibits these behaviors doesn't do it every day. They don't do it every day. They only do it once in a while. So we tell ourselves, oh, they must be having a bad day, etc. How do we make the gray zone grow? You know, one of the things that I think is your biology is going to dictate your profession, and in the future they will see that. I believe that nurses have more mirror neurons than any other human beings, because that's our ability to be empathetic, our capacity, right? But we make this gray zone grow. Our strength is also our weakness. We say things when people do those behaviors like, he's a good surgeon. She's a good nurse. Bless her heart, she's got stuff going on at home. I worked a double last night. Did you hear about her? And we allow that stuff to happen without realizing the phenomenal effect it has on our profession or our patients. How would you feel if you walked up to somebody and they picked up the assignment sheet and you were partnered with them or a new nurse with them, and as soon as they picked it up, they went, oh, do we check it out? No. No, I don't check it out, because we're so afraid that the answer might be that was because of us. The other one is we live in a culture where we don't ask for feedback. Our culture is passive aggressive. When 100 nurses were asked, what is a good nurse? These are some of the responses. Never makes a mistake, doesn't rock the boat. If I had to earn it, then you're going to have to do it too. Completes everything on time. These are not the beliefs. These are not what a good nurse is. If we continue to believe these, if any of them, then we will never advance the profession. There's extrinsic factors as well. And probably the biggest one here is the fact that nurse managers aren't on the floor anymore. They used to be on 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They were on the unit a lot more. But they're just not anymore. Why? They're in their offices. They're in meetings, making plans for technology, etc. And so what is the charge nurse to do when somebody's on Facebook for the second time, or won't stop tweeting or twittering or whatever it is they do? In the book, The Cost of Bad Behavior, the author found out that people who experience these behaviors almost always get even. In fact, it showed that 2 to 3 times in the next week they intentionally lower their productivity. They're intentionally, or they'll call out sick. Give minimal effort, lose their respect, but they never, ever in an exit interview will ever tell the real reason why they left. Why? Because that'll sting the reputation forever. Somebody will look at them and say you can't get along with others. So they're not going to say it. The impact on the nursing profession, obviously recruitment and retention. Not so obviously a lack of staff due to sick days. Why? Because working with somebody that you really don't get along with really affects your physical system. It really does. It taxes our immune system. Creates a toxic work environment. If you only knew one thing, and that is nursing is still arguing about 2 and 4 years and what the entry-level requirement is, you'd know that hostility isn't a problem with staff nurses. Heck no. In fact, Dr. Jerry Farrell found out that it's worse in the managers than it is in staff, because managers are separated by departments and there's even less trust. It happens at every level of the profession. I was so thrilled I was going to be on a radio show in San Francisco to 1 million people talking about nursing. I turned to the lady next to me and said, guess what I get to do? And I told her. And she looked at me. And this woman is in charge of recruitment and retention for an entire state. Recruitment and retention of nursing. And she turns to me and says, that shouldn't be you. That should be a California nurse. Why do you get to go? The higher you get up on the nursing food chain, the different it is. For example, if you're a chief nursing officer, it looks more like this. Oh, you didn't get that email? Goodness, I don't know how you were dropped off that list. You really should have been at that meeting. We made some important decisions. I'm sorry you weren't there. You didn't know about it? Much more subtle. But the greatest reason of all is patient safety. We all have one thing in this common regardless of where we work, and that's we're all human beings. And no human being can think straight when they're upset. So what do we do about it? Margaret Whitley says the future doesn't happen randomly. It happens from the beliefs and values we're practicing now. We want to change the future, then we have to take responsibility for what we're doing in the present. And what we're doing is all those overt and covert behaviors. Martin Luther King said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. What a profound statement. What matters? What matters is whatever you're worried about, whatever you go home and tell your husband or your girlfriend or your partner about. That's whatever bothers you is what matters. Now I'd like to do a small exercise with you that I've done with the other two groups, and we can compare your answers. Let me tell you about it first. It's very safe. At no point do you ever have to speak out loud. You don't turn to the person next to you or write anything down. The only place this exercise happens is in your own head. I ask you a question, you shake your head yes or no. I ask you another question, you pick a number. If at any time you don't want to do this, just raise your hand so I can count you out. No problem. You don't have to worry about it. All that's needed for this exercise is for you to be honest with yourself. It'll be a waste of your time and mind if you're not. If I could guarantee you in writing that the conversation would turn out exactly the way you had hoped, exactly the way you wanted, is there somebody that you work with that you'd go back to and have a conversation with in order to create a healthier work environment? If I could guarantee you in writing that the conversation would turn out exactly the way you wanted, I'd even willing to be standing there next to you, is there somebody you'd go talk to? Okay, is there anybody who does not have to talk to anybody? All right, so we all have something to say to somebody if we have this guarantee. Now I'm going to rip the guarantee up. No guarantee. Imagine the person sitting next to you right now, and you're going to turn to them and have that conversation anyway. All I want you to do is rate that conversation on a pain scale from 0 to 10. How painful is it going to be? Very first number that popped into your head, do not change it. If it's a 0, 1, 2, or 3, raise your hand. Nobody. If it's a 4 or 5, raise your hand. 3. If it's a 6 or 7, raise your hand. 4. 8, 9, 10, raise your hand. The entire room. I've already done this with 5,000 people. I've already done it with 2 groups here, and the answers are always the same. It is 80% of every group says it's an 8, 9, or 10. Isn't that interesting? So I'm not going to ask you what your conversation is. That's private, as promised. But I am going to ask for volunteers to share just why haven't you had that conversation yet? What has stopped you? What has stopped you from having that conversation? Why haven't you had it? Why haven't you had that conversation?
Intimidation.
Intimidation. So when you have the conversation, people will intimidate you. Good reason. Who else? Why haven't you had the conversation?
Time for me.
Time.
I intend to do it, and yet I
Okay.
come in the morning, and from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock I have meetings.
All right, time.
And so I don't make that a priority when I should.
Time. Very good one. Anything else?
Fear
Fear of what?
they're going to turn on you.
That they're going to turn on you. What does that look like? That looks like what? How do they turn on you?
Like they're doing to the other people.
Like they're doing to the other people. Okay, good. Thank you for your honesty. What else? Everybody's got a reason. We can all learn something about this culture if we share it, and then I'll share you the results of what other people said.
I don't think the outcome will change.
It's not going to change. Why bother? Why bother? Nothing's going to change anyway. What else?
Fear of rejection.
Fear of rejection. Yes, absolutely. Fear of rejection. And how do people reject you? How do they show rejection in the nursing culture? They give you the
Worst patients.
worst patients. What else?
Don't share knowledge.
Don't share knowledge with you. What else?
They snub you if they don't talk to you.
They snub you. They give you the silent treatment. Oh, we're good. More. What else do we do? Huh?
Not being a team player.
Not being a team player, right? They won't be a team player. Any other ones? You guys are not as... Maybe it's because it's morning, huh? Is it because it's morning? You're awful quiet. So let's look what your last group said. Fear of reprisal, fear of violence, nothing changes. Fear of being misunderstood. They don't see it, so I can't talk to them. I'll hurt their feelings. I'll be belittled, rejection, or it's uncomfortable. Now, I only have one question for you. You see all these things that we've written down here? Who's doing them to you? Who's doing all those things to you? We do them to each other. We do them to each other. That's the interesting part. And we don't even see it. There's only one purpose of all these behaviors. Do you know what the purpose of all these is? All you have to do to look at the result to get the answer to that question. People do all these things, and the goal of it is for you to be quiet. And you are, you see? Because 100% of you would have a conversation if you had a guarantee. But you're going to travel in a school of fish, and everybody's going to do everything the same. The whole goal of all those behaviors is to keep you quiet. And you know why these are there? It's not because you just imagined them. It's because this is what happened to you all. You see, one day, when you stepped out of the school of fish and you spoke your truth, you were dinner. Or as one nurse said, I got kicked off the island. I thought that was pretty clever. So the reason people do all these things is because to keep you from talking. And it works. So how do you change or advance a profession or a culture? Through language and behavior. What is the greatest gift you could give to nursing for Nurses Week? To go back and have your conversation. Here's the results from a national study of over 5,000 people now that I've asked in the United States and Canada. Isn't it a little bit spooky that the answers are exactly the same all the time? That even no time and why bother are there, and the rest of them are all fears? It never changes no matter where I go. The answers are always the same. So what I've found is something about the nursing or healthcare culture. Oh, it's not just nursing. The answers are exactly the same for physicians. Exactly. Doesn't change there either. So what we know is we're a culture of silence. We don't speak. Everybody knows their place. And the other thing that we don't realize is that our patients will never be safe until we do. What else do we know about the nursing culture? Imagine right now your cell phone goes off. The person you love most in the world is admitted to the unit where you work or is coming in for surgery. Can any doctor do the surgery? Can any nurse take care of them? Well, not any of them. Almost. What do we know? We know that 95% of the people you work with are good people. Only 5 to 8% are disruptive. We also know something else. Your mother was right. One bad apple spoils the whole bunch. And we let that one bad apple stay. How do we do that? How do we do that flippy thing in our mind where we allow somebody to take care of somebody else's? Oh, you can do surgery on that woman, but you're not touching my mother. You can take care of that post-op patient, or you can deliver that one, but you know what? If you were my sister, I'd switch. You're going to have another nurse. How is that ethical? First, do no harm wasn't a suggestion. It's an ethical mandate. I go down to California, an 18-year-old has coded on the table. The physician was supposed to draw up 10 cc's of Toradol. Instead, he reached for the epinephrine and gave it. I gave 2 days of education. It's what we call a sloppy code. They were very lucky to get this kid back. They had never done a code before. After I'm finished teaching, a nurse comes up to me and tells me the truth. The entire time the physician was reaching for, drawing up, and administering the epinephrine, he was on his cell phone talking to a stockbroker. I brought all 16 nurses back into the room and asked them to sit down and said, I only have one question for you now. If that was your brother on the table, if that was your son, would you have said something? Because if that isn't the standard by which we deliver care, then we've lost the integrity of this great profession. Period. You want to know why 22 people an hour die? Being in a hospital and medical errors is the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States. The 3rd leading cause of death. 11 of those people die of hospital-acquired infections. And yet we can't even get 100% on hand washing. You can go to any construction zone in the United States. I'll give you my house if you can find one person who doesn't have a hard hat on. They all do what they know need to do, but not the culture of safety. That hasn't changed quite so fast. As I said, it's 84 to 88% of physicians, if you want to Google the silence kills studies, that won't say something even to a coworker if they see them taking a shortcut or doing something that's not right. Dana Jack studied people who silence themselves. That is us. That is nursing. Passive aggressive. We have something to say, but we're not going to say it. And what she found out is that these people value the relationship with each other more than anything else, even the patient. What do we value? We value our own primal and psychological safety. We want to stay in the school of fish. We want to stay with the school in order to stay safe more than anything else. We don't understand ourselves as the social animals we are. We think that we're so brilliant, we focus on all our clinical skills, which are wonderful, but certainly not all of it. I'm going to introduce you to a communication model. For example, the AACN standards for nursing say that a nurse must be as competent and capable in communication and confrontation skills as clinical skills, or you're not a good nurse. We have to learn. We're missing a skill set. We have to learn how to have these conversations. And you don't get courage from a PowerPoint. It takes a lot of courage to go and have these conversations. Why? Because that's the stuff that happened to you. That's what happened to you last time you had one, so you're not going to do it. Why make the situation worse? Everybody knows she's that way or he's that way, etc. And nothing changes. Always describe. Think of the conversation now that you need to have. Lead with the facts. I'll give you an example. I walk into a report room. I'm late for my shift. As soon as I open the door, I hear Margaret say, Kathleen's such a slacker. She's always dumping on the next shift. What? In the current culture, what you do is you find your best friend and say, can you believe what she said? That's not true, is it? And you find somebody else. Do you think that's true? Do you think I'm a slacker? No. And the last thing we do is say, Margaret, I need to talk to you. To create a new culture, you'd say, Margaret, can I speak to you for a minute in private? I opened the report room door. As soon as I did, I was late for the shift. I heard you say that I was a slacker and I dumped on the next shift. I was devastated when I heard you say that because there's no way I would ever leave work for another nurse to do. Pause for a minute. Why? Because I guarantee you that more than half the time, you don't have to go any further. If you do, you'd say, Margaret, I need you to tell me the things that you're finding so I can fix them. I was unaware. I really want to be a good nurse and a member of this team. My goal is that one day I open that door and hear you say, I'd love to follow Kathleen. Everything's in order, but I can't get there without your help. Is there some way you can give me that information? I'll make it easy for you. You can just put it on a sticky. Because I really want to be a great nurse and an important member of this team. Assertive communication. That's assertive communication. Another way to do it is to begin with these words that I've shown you, and you have all these PowerPoint slides. I'll give you one more example. How do I approach an experienced nurse when she makes it obvious in many ways that she's got no time, patience, or empathy for me? I'm a new nurse. Use the communication model. D, describe. Excuse me. I noticed today you felt bothered by my questions and I felt in the way. Explain the impact. I understand your workload is heavy, but when you ignore me, I feel unimportant and I get the message that you wish I wasn't here. State what you want. I need to find some way or time to connect with you. I really need to learn. If I can't connect, I can't learn. If I can't do that, I won't stay. Can we do that? That is assertive communication. And your voice is your power. They're synonyms. To increase your self-esteem, you increase your voice. Martha Griffin did something different. She gave her new nurses a list of these professional behaviors, and she said, these are the behaviors that define a professional. Professional people don't talk about somebody when they're not there. They stand up for somebody who isn't. And you know what I would add to this list? Professional people understand you don't have to like everybody that you work with. It's not a girls' club. It's not a fort. It's a team, and we're adults, and you have to respect everybody that you work with. And you're required to speak your truth for the patient and to make sure that nobody's upset or an outsider, and the people who you feel are incompetent don't work or learn the skill. Or you point out to them, look, I've noticed something, and it concerns me. Can we talk about it? Your words are powerful. What are the most powerful words you could ever say in a conversation? I know I need to talk to you, but I'm a bit nervous about how it's going to turn out. So will you promise me something before I even start? Will you stay in this conversation with me until we both feel okay? Will you stay in this conversation with me until we both feel okay, not just one of us? So what Martha Griffin did is she realized that 93% of all communication was nonverbal, and she taught her students how to address the nonverbal. I see when you picked up the assignment sheet, you rolled your eyes. Does that mean you didn't want to work with me? You go at the end of the shift to your preceptor and say, how did I do today? And the preceptor says, oh, you did fine. Are you sure? Yeah, see you tomorrow. Then what do? And she role-played with them, and she scripted with them, and she said, I want you to go up to that nurse and say, excuse me, I know your words said that I did fine today, but your tone of voice tells me there's another problem. Can we go somewhere and talk about that right now? I'd rather hear it right from you. Did her students experience hostility? Oh yeah, but for all of them it ended. Her 2-year retention rate is over 90% with over 4 classes now. You know why? Because she gave them the tools to end it. Research shows that when nurses graduate from a bachelor's program, that their level of self-esteem is the same from any program, biology, mathematics, computer science. You know when their self-esteem falls? When they come to the hospital, when they come to work. Their self-esteem falls because we do the nonverbal behaviors and we don't check them out. And here's some examples that you can take with you. Unfortunately, the number one, if you work in the emergency room, the number one way that nurses experience hostility in an ER is withholding information. In the last study, 45% of nurses said that information was withheld from them. I just don't think that we realize the ethical connection, or we would never be doing something like that. In a recent study of 700 physicians and nurses in an emergency room, 33% could link a disruptive behavior to an adverse event, and 13% could link a disruptive behavior to mortality. Meaning the patient specifically died because of the disruptive behavior. An action plan for new nurses. I'm just going to touch on a couple of these, but none of them cost any money and everybody can do them. If you know that the greatest need for the soul is for belonging, and that power is really important, what would you do? Well, say you have a new nurse starting in January. Photocopy the January calendar, put the new nurse's schedule on, and put it up in the break rooms, and have everybody different. Every day, somebody, like a dance card, somebody signs up to have lunch or share a dinner meal with this person. What's the most important conversation that you can share during this meal? Share a story from your first day here at work, or your first day as a nurse. We were young too, right? If you're a preceptor, every day at the end of the shift you give feedback to your new grad. Start something different. By the time you give feedback to the new person, the new nurse, and then say, what feedback do you have for me as your mentor? How can I be a better mentor for you tomorrow? If you're a real professional nurse, you would find the person that you work with the most frequently and ask them these 2 questions. What do you like that I do well? What would you like to see more of? Professional people seek feedback regardless of their level. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO, a physician, a surgeon. A group of powerful surgeons that I know realized that they needed feedback in order to improve, because no human being sees themselves. So they made up a sheet of paper, they put all their names down it, and they made 3 categories from 1 to 5: patient complaints, approachability, and professionalism. And then they said to the nurses, please rate us on these scales so that we know what we have to work on so that we could become better. That's leadership. The other, as a strategy, decrease negativity and increase the climate of safety. If you just decrease the negativity, you'll fail, because we're missing a skill set. The bottom line is we need to be able to confront people and to have the conversations. If you remember only one slide from this presentation, please remember this one. A culture of hostility or toxicity, toxic work environment, can only exist if you have 3 things in the petri dish: secrecy, shame, and a silent witness. Cheyenne came up to me after this presentation one day and said, can I talk to you for a minute? I'm really upset. I just need a couple minutes to vent. Sure, Cheyenne, I said. Sit down. What's up? I went out to dinner with my husband last week, and I was even bragging that in 14 years as a nurse, never once in 14 years did I ever say a bad word about anybody. And today I realized I never walked away either. I stood there and listened to hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations about why so-and-so wouldn't make a good nurse or do something right, or how I didn't want to work with so-and-so, or et cetera, et cetera. I didn't realize that. What can I do? Walk away. I'll guarantee you one thing. If you ever hear people in your workplace talking about somebody else when they're not there, they're talking about you when you're not there. If you want to stop that, your manager can't, because she's not on the floor, or he's not on the floor. The only people who can stop it are the people who see it. Say, I'm not listening. I wouldn't want somebody talking about me when I'm not here, so I'm not going to listen. Looks like you want to have something to say to Jack. Why don't you guys take lunch together today? I'll schedule you together. Or turn around and simply walk away. One nurse said she did that last week, and when she came back 15 minutes later, they were still talking about the person. She said, I had to turn around and walk away again. She says, maybe they'll get it. What can you do? Be aware of the signs and symptoms of hostility. It's not just a personality issue. A Chinese magician was once asked by his student, Master, how do you take the power away from something? And the magician said, that's easy. You just call it by its name. Eye rolling, refusing to work with only certain people, refusing to not work with certain people, especially all this stuff, that's hostility. We're a team, we're professionals, and professional people have a different standard. Speak your truth. Go back and hold those crucial conversations. Be compassionate and understand the many forces affecting nurses today. In studies of 8-hour shifts, they showed that a nurse has 75 cognitive shifts in one 8-hour period, is interrupted 19 times, walks 8 to 10 miles, does 160 tasks. No task lasts longer than 2 minutes and 45 seconds. There are, 6,600 drugs, 4,000 procedures. Let's give each other a break. While the length of stay is decreasing, the acuity is increasing. I used to have 1 blood sugar to do, now everybody's got a blood sugar to do, et cetera, et cetera. Adopt a zero-tolerance policy. The nurses on our floor, when they heard about what happened down in California, they wrote up a unit philosophy, and this is what it said. We promise you, it hangs on our unit today, so all visitors can see it. We promise that we will care for your loved one as we would our own family member, with the same amount of vigilance, skill, and compassion. And we recognize and acknowledge that in order to create a healthy work environment and the safest patient care environment, we must care for each other. Therefore, there will be no hostility of any kind tolerated on this unit. And then in a union environment of 57 of their peers, they took this piece of paper and said, you have 3 options: sign it, edit it, or leave. And of course, the 2 most negative nurses on the floor wouldn't do any of those things. And that's where the manager, me, had to step in. Until they do. We need to get on the same page. All around the hospital are signs posted about the mission, vision, and values. They're nothing but words spoken by dead people if you don't live them. A mission is only as valuable as if it's alive, if people actually do respect each other and show compassion. One time I had 3 pages of reasons why nurses wouldn't talk to each other. And I said to the audience, anybody here go to church? The entire audience raised their hand. And I looked at this, and I just looked at my audience and said, oh. Is this what you believe? No, it's what we do, but we don't consciously do it, and that's the hard part. It's just about human beings when we get in a group. If we understood what our greatest needs are, if we understood that our focus is on the patient, and so this other stuff is out of our level of awareness. How can we bring it into our level of awareness? You are not told the truth. You are far more fragile as human beings, far more sensitive than anyone has ever told you, and the opposite is also true. Think of the person who you love to work with the most. You're like Demerol and Finnegan. It don't matter if there's a tornado. You can cover the entire floor yourselves because you say, I'm on the same wavelength. I'm on the same page. And Margaret Wheatley, in her book on quantum physics and organization, says, you literally are. You literally are. What would it look like if your whole unit was like that? You are much stronger than you've ever been told to. That when we come together and we're really on the same page, we form a different group. Look at your belief system. Never be a silent witness. Never stand by while somebody talks about somebody else. Good nurses make mistakes. Good nurses don't always finish their work. They speak the truth, they rock the boat, and they're team players, even though they say they don't agree with something. You know, the research shows that the more positive deviance you have, the more creativity and innovation you have. If nobody's disagreeing, then things aren't going to change. Take time to reflect on your practice and the incredible work that you do. Attain the skill set that's missing. Assertive communication. Basically, your own requirement is, I need to be able to say anything to anybody, regardless of the consequences. Good nurses can handle the environment. Florence was right. The environment is critical. It's critical to patient safety. If a nurse is upset, then she can't think straight. Not only do we have to protect the patient, but we have to protect each other. There's nobody. I mean, the feeling after you make a mistake is horrible, and it's just luck. And every nurse that I know that heard about the nurse in our state that took her own life had the same thing running through their mind. That could have been me. That could have been me. Could have been my mistake. So how can we ethically do it? Compliment each other. Put a little box at the bottom of your brain or your little piece of paper that you carry around every day. It's your compliment box, and your shift isn't over until you can say one nice thing about somebody. Believe it or not, physicians receive even less compliments than nurses do. And nice working with you isn't a compliment. There are just not enough positive. And all research shows, in order for people to accept constructive feedback, they have to have 5 positives to 1 constructive feedback. Well, there are no positives around here. I love the way, specifically, Kim, it's so great working with you. You can get a Foley in every time. You've got a 100% success rate. And I can't. But just knowing that you're working and that you've got my back if I can't get it in makes all the difference in the world. I'm glad I'm working with you. I notice you're great with the psych patients. You can de-escalate anybody. How do you do that? Will you share it with me so I can learn? Etc. Provide opportunities for socialization. 12-hour shifts are the worst thing that ever happened in this profession. Worst. Not just because of the data, because human beings can't exist for 12 hours with that amount of critical thinking skills. It's an overload on a frontal cortex. How many times have you gone home and thought to yourself after a shift, hours later, darn, I forgot to give the tissues to the guy in 64. I forgot to chart the blood in the eyes and nose. I forgot to include it. It's because you have an overload. Studies of forgetfulness in women have shown that the #1 cause is multitasking, overtasking, cognitive overload. After an 8-hour shift, we used to go out for coffee, shoot pool. Once every couple of months, we'd get together and we'd share things with each other that you wouldn't normally know. My husband and I are not getting along. My child's been diagnosed with autism. My mother-in-law moved in with me. She's dying of cancer, and I was up last night giving her some medicine. And when we know those things about each other, which we don't share on the floor because we don't want everybody to hear them, then we have more compassion for each other. Embrace and protect new nurses, because the story of nursing is not written. We write it every day. We write it by our decisions. That moment when you go onto the floor and you have an opportunity the next time to speak or to be silent, to walk away from the group, to continue doing what everybody else does so that you belong, or to create a new culture, because I truly believe that nursing is the most amazing profession of all. The same hand that holds a patient while they're dying because they have no relatives. That's the hand that titrates a dopamine drip. It's a magnificent profession. I had no idea what I was getting into. But we live in a very sick world, and I believe that 3.1 million nurses can definitely affect our society and our world. But first, we have to start with each other. Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure being with you today.
Thank you for listening. This presentation by Kathleen Bartholomew is protected by worldwide copyright. Please visit KathleenBartholomew.com for additional programs and to order her books and other educational materials. Kathleen is available for a limited number of in-person presentations every year. For information on booking such a program, please refer to the Contact tab on Kathleen's website. Kathleen is also a founder of the Orca Institute of Friday Harbor, Washington, which provides vital and current programs and consulting services in support of hospitals, medical staff, physicians, and nurses worldwide.